You're listening to Soundside on KUOW. I'm Libby Dankman. A new school year has started. Kids are sharpening pencils and breaking in backpacks. Many are also getting used to another new tool, artificial intelligence. A slew of tech companies have been offering free or low-cost AI products to schools that will purportedly engage students and help them learn, while also aiding teachers with their day-to-day responsibilities. When ChatGPT became available to the public in 2022, education officials initially focused on restricting its use in schools. But recently, there has been an accelerated push to move AI into the classroom. In a survey by the Consortium for School Networking, more than 50% of districts across the nation said they were training teachers in how to use AI. But are these tools actually creating a better learning environment? And who stands to benefit from their growth in American education? Vauhini Vara spent the last 8 months doing a deep dive into how school districts are increasingly integrating AI in the classroom. She wrote about it for Bloomberg Business Week, and she joins me now. Vauhini, welcome. It's so good to have you back on the show.
It's so great to be here again. Thanks, Libby.
In general, we're looking at tools for teachers and then tools for students, right? What are the aims of these different tools?
So, and to be clear, right now, it's still more common for schools to be using this for teachers than with students, but especially in this academic year that's just starting, schools are using it with students much more. So with teachers, what it can look like is teachers using AI chatbots to respond to emails from parents, administrators using AI to do things like make bus schedules, and then also teachers using AI to do things like write lesson plans, create syllabi, come up with projects for students to do in class, come up with quizzes, and even grade those quizzes, give feedback on student papers. So there's a wide range of things this is being used for. And then to the extent that students are using these things, one kind of increasingly common use is for students to be using chatbots themselves to do things like feeding a chatbot something that they wrote, like an essay, for example, and getting feedback on that essay. Or there are these more experimental uses too. Like I visited this school in Evans, Colorado, near where I live, and I watched students use these sort of character chatbots that their teacher had designed to be historical figures, like the Holocaust survivor and memoirist Elie Wiesel. And so they were chatting with a fake version, pretend version of Elie Wiesel about Elie Wiesel's memoir night.
You got to sit in this classroom and watch as students are using the AI. And the Elie Wiesel example stood out to me. Also, there was a chatbot, John Brown. Tell me more about how these played out in real time and what you observed when students were using the AI.
So the teacher in this classroom, Nate Fairchild, I watched as he introduced these assignments where students could use these character chatbots. And every time he would say, listen, this chatbot is not actually the historical figure. It's an AI chatbot pretending to be a historical figure. There might be inaccuracies, there might be biases, and you should double check it all. In practice, when I watched the students, I very rarely saw them actually figuring out how to cross-check information or verify it, in part because that's really hard to do. That's something that we as adults struggle to do as well. And in a 90-minute class or 60-minute class, you don't get a lot of time to be doing that in real time. And so, here's an example of what happened when students were using the John Brown chatbot, for example. So John Brown was an abolitionist who killed 5 supporters of slavery, 5 pro-slavery activists. And he characterized those actions of his as righteous. When the students asked this chatbot, pretending to be John Brown, what he thought of violence in response to violent social conditions like slavery, the chatbot kept responding with things like, violence is never the answer. There's always something else you can do, right? And this is because there are safeguards built into these products to prevent them from doing things like generating violent rhetoric. And yet, what it's also doing is conveying false information, fake news about what John Brown in reality said about his violence.
And this is a tool called Magic School you were observing. Can you tell us more about what is Magic School?
Yes, Magic School is a Denver-based company that has become one of the most prolific AI products in schools. And it's partly because they have a free product that teachers and students can use without paying for it. And what this company does is that it builds these chatbots using the AI models of bigger companies like OpenAI and Google and so on, that teachers and students can use in their daily work to do things like the ones we talked about earlier, build lesson plans or chat with a chatbot that can help you with your grammar or whatever. And so because of this, because it's built on the products from big technology companies that we know struggle still with things like accuracy and bias, those things can then make their way into Magic School's products. And Magic School's CEO told me there's actually not a lot we can do about that.
Did you see any benefits or any surprising creative flourishes or anything coming out of the use of Magic School in the classroom that you observed?
I did. So to be clear, with any product used in any context, it's likely that you'll see some things that are interesting or even beneficial in addition to the harms you see, right? One thing students told me about that I didn't observe firsthand, but that they said was something they found really useful, was feeding an essay to Magic School and saying, can you tell me what the mistakes are that I made here? And the teacher would feed his rubric for grading essays into Magic School. So Magic School would theoretically be offering feedback based on that rubric. Students told me that it did a decent job at that. And the outcome was that they were able to address certain things before they turned it into their teacher. The teacher said he was then able to do higher level work. There are things that are potentially problematic about that use, but it would be disingenuous to say, like, there's nothing that's potentially helpful about these products. I think students and teachers did describe to me certain uses that they found useful.
So let's talk about how products like Magic School and others are getting into the classroom. And you write about this effort by companies where they're spending money, especially donating to nonprofits, with the goal of encouraging this shift for schools to welcome AI. And it seems like that campaign is pretty broad and it's getting a lot of traction, especially in the 25-26 school year. So what is happening there?
So school districts have depended for years on these outside organizations to advise them on how to use technology. One of them is called ISTE, which stands for the International Society for Technology and Education. There are other groups like Common Sense Media, Code.org, that has created this entity called Teach AI that's specifically oriented around AI. There's something called AI EDU. So there are all these organizations, some of them longstanding, some new, that position themselves to districts as being able to give advice to districts about how to think about technology, including AI. Well, it turns out big technology companies are providing a lot of the funding to these organizations. So AI EDU gets a lot of funding from technology companies. ISTE is maybe the entity that districts turn to most frequently. And its AI initiative is funded largely, if not entirely, by Google. So these organizations, to be clear, say over and over, listen, we're independent. We do get our funding from these companies, but we provide independent feedback to schools. We sometimes criticize the things companies do. All of this is true. And at the same time, you see these organizations using rhetoric that sounds a lot like the rhetoric that the companies use, which is something like, we are moving into a world in which AI is the future. In order to prepare students for that world, we need AI in schools now. We need teachers to be using it, and we need students to be using it.
There are also partnerships between AI companies and teachers' unions, right? What's going on there? That really surprised me.
It surprised me also. So I had assumed when I started my reporting that the teachers' unions would be an interesting place to go to hear a little bit about teacher resistance to AI, because educators are in many cases resistant to the use of AI. But what I found is that the two major teachers unions, the AFT and the NEA in the US, are both partnering with big technology companies. This summer, Microsoft, OpenAI, and Anthropic, together with the AFT, the second biggest teachers union, announced a $23 million institute for AI teacher training that's about to open. And some people, when that news came out, some teachers were commenting, I noticed on social media, saying, this is why the NEA has always been better than the AFT, the NEA being the other teachers union, But it turned out the NEA was also doing a partnership with Microsoft. It just hadn't been announced as loudly. But the NEA has also worked with Microsoft, with Google, again, around AI teacher training. I talked to representatives from both of those unions, and one of them described really feeling that the head of the AFT, Randy Weingarten, said she feels that AI is kind of like the printing press. It's going to be a huge foundational change-making technology, and she is bought into the idea that this is a technology of the future and kids need to learn it. A representative from the other union, the NEA, the larger union, said she feels that AI could be problematic in society, in schools, but partnering with the companies building these technologies is a potential way to have teacher input into how they're built. So these are two different sort of rationales for partnering with the companies, but the outcome is that these unions are taking money from the companies and using that money in part to train teachers in how to use AI.
And when funding is scarce and personnel are scarce, and this is a source of a big influx of training money, of money to understand this stuff, and if you feel it's inevitable, then why not take this money, right? I mean, they don't seem to have other alternatives at this point.
That's exactly right. I mean, I think that's the reasoning on the part of a lot of school districts. They have very scarce funding, really limited political capital in this current environment politically. And so they just don't have the money and they don't have the political will to do the things that are actually proven to be effective, like, hiring more teachers, paying teachers more so that they can have more time for professional development to become better teachers. These are things that have been shown over years of research to be effective. They're not able to do those things. And then I think what happens is tech companies come along and say, hey, listen, we've developed this training that you can provide your teachers for free. We have these products, these AI technologies that we can build into the products you're already using, or we can provide you for free or at a very low cost. And I think districts think to themselves, well, somebody were offering us billions of dollars to hire more teachers. We would choose that option instead, but nobody's offering us that. They're offering us something else. We don't know how it's going to work. The research is inconclusive, but we might as well try it. There's not a high financial cost for us.
To be fair to these companies, it might not be just about, hey, let's get a bunch of new customers and testers basically for this technology. It's also like looking down the road, this is going to be a huge economic disruptor. And we do want to see kids be ready for it, and ready for this gigantic economic and social disruption that AI poses. There are good faith defenses of why these companies would be investing in schools, right?
I think that's right. And there's a caveat to that as well. So if it's very, very likely that we're entering a future in which using AI products is going to be an important skill in the workforce, one can see the way in which both companies and districts are making a good strategic choice and saying, let's teach students how to use these things. That said, it's not at all clear that we are necessarily moving into a future like that. There's increasingly evidence that companies that are using AI in the workplace are actually not getting much of a benefit from it. There is resistance from workers in some quarters. And so there's an equally plausible future in which AI is currently a bubble and it's going to go away, right? And so I don't know. I think sometimes when we hear those arguments that like AI is definitely the future and therefore we need to prepare for it, that feels a little premature to me as a journalist, just knowing that we have no idea what the future will be like.
But that inevitability does benefit companies that are looking to lower regulations, that are looking to gain new customers. What do we know about how AI affects learning, Vauhini? Like, do we have evidence, research on what it's actually doing when it comes to thinking critically for kids or, improving the way that they learn?
Yeah, any parent or teacher or human who is interested in this can find a good resource at an entity called the Stanford Accelerator for Learning at Stanford, which actually collects research. It has like a database of all the good research, peer-reviewed research on this topic. And so you can go there and look at it. I talked to the executive director of the Stanford Accelerator for Learning. Her name is Isabel Howe. And she told me that the research that they track, so they look at all the good research, and she calls it largely inconclusive. And it's her job to track all of this and look at it. She says that some studies show benefits, other studies point to harms, and they raise concerns that AI could create what researchers call a crutch effect, right? Where you aren't able to properly learn to think because you are reliant on this crutch that's purporting to help you do that. So it's not at all clear. There's research that shows that it might help. There's research that shows that it might hurt. And then there are all these unresolved additional questions that are coming up. So AI companies are increasingly admitting that they are having a hard time figuring out how to get their products from not making stuff up. And so if you've got misinformation and biases coming out of your products, how is that going to warp students' understanding of what's happening in the world? If you have AI generated course material based on actual scholarship from actual scholars, how does that marginalize the scholarship behind it? There's research that shows that when AI grading tools are used, that can amplify biases like racial biases and gender biases in human grading. So it can be humans are biased ourselves. AI grading appears to amplify that in some cases. And then more broadly speaking, what does it mean to take education, which has traditionally been thought of as this very social enterprise in which students are being taught by teachers whose job it is to care about their growth? What does it mean to take that and put it in the hands of tech companies who have a totally different motive, which is profit? How does that warp social relationships and social learning? And how does it warp sort of what the point of education is in the first place?
Vauhini, I do wonder, you and I are part of the generation that probably played Oregon Trail on their Mac LC2s in the computer lab when we were growing up. One could argue that back then they were selling us Apple products. Today, Google Classroom is ubiquitous. People are using Gmail, Google Docs in the classroom a lot. Generations of students had to learn how to cite Wikipedia entries, instead of writing their whole papers based on copying and pasting Wikipedia. Like, is there something more happening here than this typical march of new technology, new schools, new classroom practices?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that question. I mean, yeah, I think you and I are of the same Pacific Northwest generation. And I think a lot of parents and teachers are from that generation as well. And so, right, like I went through school playing Oregon Trail and so on, using Macs, but we weren't on screens nonstop. We weren't taking notes at our desks using screens. One thing that is worth noting about that is that during the period in which things like Google Classroom and the use of screens in classrooms has proliferated, test scores for students have gone down and teachers have reported increasing burnout. And when you look into the data and look at why those teachers are saying they're burnt out, it's because there are more data reporting requirements oriented around, again, using tech products at school. And so one thing I would say is that it is true that this is part of a broader trend, but it's not clear that like the broader trend in the first place is beneficial to schools. There may be things that are harmful to teachers and to students in the trends in the first place. That said, I would say that the new thing here with AI is additionally problematic things about the way in which it functions, right? So things like AI products using a tone of authority while offering misinformation, offering biased information is problematic in a way that's different from past products. Also, the products are able to potentially gather more information about students, who they are, how they use products, how they talk, than tech products of the past. And to be clear, I should say that the companies behind the products do say when students use these products in school, we give schools a version of the product that's not mining student data to target advertising to them, for example. But still, there are privacy implications that go beyond the past. And so there's a long list. I won't go through them all. But yes, it is both part of a continuum, and it goes beyond what we've done in the past in schools.
This work that AI companies are doing, partnering with nonprofits and teachers unions to get more products and more training in schools, this is coming simultaneously with a big push from the federal government, where the Trump administration has supported the expansion of AI in classrooms, including promoting the use of industry dollars. And you point out that this is happening at the same time Trump is dismantling the Department of Education. Do you think that this would be a logical role from the Department of Education to look at safeguards, to look at regulation or ways to kind of put brakes on, to maybe fund more research, things like that? In its absence, who steps into that gap?
That's a great question. I don't think we know the answer to that question. But you're right in pointing out that the way the federal government is currently thinking about education is saying, by and large, our traditional definitions of education and what schools are for and how they should be supported and funded. We're going to break all that down. Our top priority is AI. So they say very explicitly that when they think about education, the thing they're most excited about is bringing AI into schools. And so they put out a memo, for example, to school districts saying, here are the ways in which you can use existing funding to buy AI products, to spend money on training for AI for your teachers. So they are really going all in, and it's coming, as you point out, at a time where they're really pulling back on the traditional priorities the federal government has had for public education.
Your reporting really focuses on companies who have a financial stake in the future of AI in schools and others who mostly work in education who appear to be supportive of AI in schools, because there is this storyline of inevitability that we've talked about here today. And there's a desire to ensure that kids in public schools don't fall behind, that the assumption is that private schools or other, homeschooling, you're going to have these resources at your fingertips. So public school kids shouldn't fall behind. Does it leave room for critics anywhere in the process if the teachers unions are on board, if these nonprofits that help schools with technology are on board, and districts are feeling like we have to grab this funding and use it? Is there space for anybody who's saying, hey, too much too fast? I mean, the whole your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they didn't stop to think if they should Jurassic Park meme. Is anybody fulfilling that Jeff Goldblum role right now?
Yes. So what I found so fascinating in my reporting was that a lot of the institutional players, like school districts, companies, nonprofits, teachers unions, were all pretty excited about AI and its prospects in the classroom, its prospects for the future. But at the grassroots, teachers I spoke to, parents spoke to, people just commenting on social media on these topics are quite vocally raising concerns and questions about the use of AI in the classroom. There was this recent poll called the PDK poll that found that people in the US are far less supportive of the use of AI in schools for things like lesson plan preparation for teachers or homework help for students this year in 2025 than they were the previous year. There are also organizations that are coming together to try to encourage more critical thought about the use of AI in classrooms. One of them is called the Civics of Technology Project. This is a group formed by a group of educators and researchers, and they are trying to get schools and teachers to prioritize studying the effects of technology on society, including AI. And they make the point that people, students, parents, teachers might say, you know what, we don't want to use these products in our schools. And we actually don't agree that there's an inevitable future in which AI proliferates, and we need to prepare students for that. There is that bubbling up. And I think part of the reason there's no sort of centralized, powerful movement the way there is on the other side is that the other side has a lot of resources. And this is new enough that I think it just will take a little more time. But it does seem to me that resistance is building up, just like it did against, for example, screens in classrooms, smartphones for kids. I think we are moving into that phase.
You have spent a lot of time in the AI space, in technology reporting in general, formerly with the Wall Street Journal. And you've been looking at the utility of AI specifically as a creative, quote unquote, collaborator. That's a process you chronicled in your last book that we talked about, Searches. And I recommend for anybody who's curious about that creative process and the way that AI works or does not work in it to check out the book. You left that experience of Searches pretty jaded about the idea of AI as a creative tool or a creative collaborator. How do you feel now, before we go here, Vauhini, about AI as a teacher or a tutor or a study buddy?
AI products are, and I'm talking here about chatbot style products, are products that use the rhetoric of being human, but are not at all human. And to the extent that they represent anyone's perspective, anyone's priorities, it's the perspective and priorities of the tech companies that build the products, right? And so I think that's a problematic mix. I mean, there are increasingly stories coming out in the news, right, about the consequences, sometimes fatal, of human beings having the illusion that the entity they're speaking to is human-like. And it's really scary to me because I have a 10-year-old, kids' brains are still developing. If adults struggle to distinguish between an AI chatbot built by a big technology company and a human being, I think it's a pretty high expectation that we're putting on kids to expect that they'll be able to do that effectively.
Vauhini Vara is the author of several books, including The Immortal King Rao, a finalist for the Pulitzer in Fiction, and the memoir Searches. Her most recent reporting can be found in Bloomberg Business Week. It's called How Chatbots and AI Are Already Transforming Kids' Classrooms. Vauhini, thank you. It's always a pleasure. I really appreciated the conversation today.
Me too. Thanks, Olivia. It's good talking to you.
And if you, listeners, have any feedback or you've noticed anything about the use of AI in your local schools, we'd love to hear from you, your experiences and thoughts about how it's being used and its benefits or its drawbacks. Please email us at soundside@kuow.org. By the way, this show is only possible because listeners support us. If you are able to give right now, check out the show notes for a link to donate. And don't forget, you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 FM Seattle at noon and 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, or anytime online at kuow.org.